The rain did not fall in Montana that night in 1870. It roared, a relentless cascade that bent pine boughs and churned the earth into rivers of mud. Thunder growled across the mountain ridges, a primal pulse that shook the air, while the wind wove through cedar trees, its low moan carrying a sorrow older than the hills. Sarah stood beneath it all, her woolen shawl sodden, her auburn hair plastered to her pale cheeks. Her boots sank into the mire, heavy with grit, but her arms held firm around the boy she carried. Isaac, no older than 3, slept against her chest, his dark lashes wet against copper-toned skin, wrapped tightly in a blanket that could not keep out the storm's chill. She tightened her grip and stepped toward the lodge ahead, its buffalo hide flap glowing faintly with firelight. Her hand rose, hesitated, then knocked. The door swung open before her second knock landed. Nathan filled the frame, his bare shoulders glistening with raindrops and the flicker of the hearth behind him. His black hair, long and unbound, framed a face carved by time and trial. His eyes met hers, and the silence that fell was not shock but recognition, a spark of memory that burned through years of separation. Sarah did not flinch. Her voice cut through the wind, steady despite the storm's theft of its edges. "You do not have to believe me," she said, "but this boy is yours." Nathan stood motionless, his gaze locked on her, not the child. He saw the woman he had pulled from a burning camp 5 years ago, her hands trembling as they stitched his wounded side, her voice whispering songs in a tongue not her own. He had thought her lost, swallowed by the war's end and the world he had fled. Now she stood here, drenched and defiant, with a child bearing his blood. Isaac stirred, a soft whimper lost in the gale. Sarah shifted to shield him, her eyes never leaving Nathan's. Behind him, a sharp voice broke the moment. "Who is she?" Wendy stepped into view, wrapped in a dyed elk-hide blanket, her black eyes glinting beneath heavy brows. She had seen Sarah once, years ago, from a distance, a fleeting glimpse of the nurse who haunted Nathan's silences. Now she stood closer, her presence a challenge. "Why is she here?" Wendy demanded, her gaze flicking to the child, then back to Sarah's unflinching face. Sarah said nothing, her silence a wall against accusation. Nathan stepped forward, down into the mud, his breath clouding in the cold. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, not unkind but heavy with a question he could not name. "I looked for you," Sarah replied. "After the war there was nothing. No name, no tribe, no place to send word. They told me you were dead." She glanced at Isaac, her voice softening. "His name is Isaac. He was born in the winter after you left." Nathan looked at the boy, truly looked, and saw the truth in the curve of his brow, the shape of his nose, the skin that spoke of a lineage neither fully of the plains nor the towns. His jaw tightened, and he turned away, as if the weight of it pressed too hard against his chest. "I did not come to ruin anything," Sarah said, sensing Wendy's glare. "I came because he deserves to know." Wendy stepped closer, her voice ablade. "She lies." "She sees who you are now and wants to steal what is mine." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she held her tongue, her silence colder than any retort, carrying the weight of winters endured alone, of nights tucking Isaac in with stories of a father who had once been brave. Nathan raised a hand, silencing both women. His fingers trembled faintly. "You need shelter," he said to Sarah. "You cannot stand in this storm." "I am not here to beg," she replied. "I know," he said, his eyes on Isaac. "But he should not sleep in the rain." He paused, then pointed toward the riverbank. "There is an empty healer's tent with a hearth and dry straw. You can stay there tonight." Sarah nodded once. "Thank you." She turned, her boots sinking into the mud, and vanished into the mist and pine, the storm swallowing her form. Behind Nathan, Wendy's voice cracked. "You would give her shelter?" "I give the child shelter," he said, stepping back into the lodge. The fire's warmth did not reach him, not that night. The healer's tent sat on the village's edge, where the river's murmur blended with the wind's sigh. Sarah pushed aside the hide flap, the scent of damp straw and charred wood greeting her. She laid Isaac on a pallet, his small body curling instinctively toward warmth. The hearth glowed faintly, and she fed it kindling, watching flames rise. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the weight of what she had done. She had crossed mountains, faced whispers and hunger to bring Isaac here. For what? A man who might not want them. A village that would never accept them? She touched Isaac's hair, her resolve hardening. "You will know your father," she whispered, "even if it breaks me." Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, but the night pressed heavy. Sarah sat by the fire, her shawl still damp, and let memory surface. Nathan's quiet eyes in the camp, his hands steady as he sang to a dying boy, the night he had fought for her, blood pooling beneath his ribs. She had loved him, not with words, but with every stitch, every glance, every breath. And now, here, she stood alone again, with only a boy and a truth to hold. Nathan did not sleep. The lodge was quiet, save for Wendy's shallow breathing in the corner, her elk-hide blanket pulled tight. He lay on his mat, eyes tracing the carved beams overhead, symbols of wind, sun, and names long gone. Sarah's voice echoed, "This boy is yours." He saw the child's face, the mirror of his own, and felt the past claw at him. He had left her in that camp, not by choice, but by chaos. War's end, chains broken, men scattered. He had thought her safe, free, gone. Now she was here, with a son he had never known, and a truth he could not unsee. Wendy stirred, her presence a reminder of duty. Her father, the chief, had all but sealed their union, her pride a fire that burned for all to see. Yet tonight, Nathan's heart was not in the lodge. It was by the river, in a tent where a woman and child slept under his protection. He rose, pulling a fur over his shoulders, and stepped outside. The fire pit's embers glowed, and he crouched beside it, feeding it twigs. The flames rose, but they did not answer the question burning in his chest. What did he owe a past he had buried and a future he had promised? The summer of 1865 hung heavy over the Texas detainment camp, the air thick with dust and the acrid tang of unwashed bodies. Sarah, her nurse's armband stained and frayed, moved through the rows of wounded men, her steps measured but her eyes sharp. The camp was a sprawl of sagging tents and splintered fences, where Confederate guards barked orders and prisoners, runaways, rebels, and those caught in war's indiscriminate net shuffled under the weight of hunger and despair. She had come here with a naive hope that kindness could survive in a world drowning in blood, but each day tested that conviction. Among the prisoners, one man stood apart, Nathan, a Cheyenne captured in a skirmish near the Pecos River. He was taller than most, with quiet eyes that neither begged nor flinched, his presence a stillness amid the chaos. Sarah first noticed him on a morning thick with heat, when she found him kneeling beside a boy no older than 17, moaning from a gangrenous wound. Nathan dipped a rag in a tin of water, wrung it with calloused hands, and sang low in a language she could not understand, a melody soft as a river's flow, yet heavy with grief. She froze in the doorway, a bowl of salve in her hands, and watched. His voice held the boy until the pain eased, and when the boy's breathing stilled, Nathan closed his eyes gently, as if laying a brother to rest. Sarah turned away, her throat tight, and busied herself with bandages, but from that moment she saw him everywhere, carving wooden toys for children in the rear quarters, helping a fevered man sit upright, staring at the stars as if they whispered secrets of home. Their connection grew in fragments, unspoken but undeniable. A brush of hands when she passed him water, a glance held too long across the firelight. One night, chaos erupted. A shipment of liquor meant for Union guards was stolen and tempers flared. Drunk soldiers turned on each other, looting supplies, dragging women from tents. Sarah was yanked from her cot, her hair ripped loose, hands bound. She fought, screamed, bit until her mouth tasted of blood. Then Nathan's shout pierced the dark, a war cry that split the night. He charged from the shadows, unarmed, his body a shield. A soldier raised a blade. It caught Nathan's ribs, but he did not fall. He tackled the man, fists pounding until the soldier lay still. When it was over, Sarah lay trembling beneath a collapsed tent wall, her dress torn, her cheek bruised. Nathan collapsed beside her, blood soaking his shirt. She dragged him to the infirmary, her hands steadying as she stitched his wound by lantern light, whispering his name like a prayer. "You should have run," she murmured. His voice, hoarse, answered, "I could not leave you." It was not love in the way poets write, not yet. It was something raw, born of survival and shared silences. They found solace in small acts. Sarah slipping him extra bread, Nathan carving her a wooden bird, its wings smoothed by his careful hands. One night, on a cot where clean sheets were kept, they gave in to the pull between them. No vows, no promises. Just the warmth of two bodies seeking something human amid inhuman times. Her fingers traced the scar on his ribs. His breath caught as he said her name, as if tasting its weight. By morning, the sky burned orange with cannon smoke. The camp was overrun by Union troops reclaiming order. Prisoners vanished, some released, others transferred, a few executed in silence. Nathan was gone, leaving only a blood-stained shirt in the infirmary and the ghost of his touch on her skin. Sarah searched every corner, questioned every guard, but found no trace, no record, only the ache of a name she could not forget. Weeks later, nausea gripped her, then dizziness, then the swell of her belly. Fear clawed harder than the war ever had. The townsfolk turned cold, calling her a traitor, a woman who had lain with a savage. Her church shut its doors. The baker refused her coin. She delivered Isaac alone in a miner's boarding house, screaming into a pillow to muffle her pain. Holding his tiny hand, she named him Isaac and swore he would never feel shame for his blood, even if the world demanded it. Each night she told him stories of a man who sang to broken boys, who fought with bare fists and soft eyes, who had once whispered her name as if it mattered. In the healer's tent by the Montana River, Sarah sat by the hearth, the fire's glow casting shadows on the hide walls. Isaac slept on the straw pallet, his small chest rising and falling, unaware of the village beyond, where whispers had already begun. The rain had stopped, but the air held a chill that seeped into her bones. She pulled her damp shawl tighter, her mind heavy with the day's weight. The village women had watched her as she passed, their eyes sharp with suspicion, their voices low but not low enough. "The white one from the war camps," one had muttered. "Claims the child is his," another hissed. Sarah had kept her head down, her hand firm on Isaac's, but each word struck like a stone. Isaac stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and Sarah knelt beside him, smoothing his hair. "You are enough," she whispered, though the words were as much for herself. She had known this journey would be hard, crossing mountains, enduring hunger, facing a man who might have forgotten her. But she had not expected the village's coldness to cut so deep, nor Wendy's glare to burn so fiercely. Wendy, with her proud stance and sharp tongue, saw Sarah as a thief, a liar come to steal what she had claimed. Sarah understood the woman's fear. Love made people fierce, and Wendy's love for Nathan was a fire that would not bend. Yet Nathan's eyes, when he had looked at Isaac, had held something else. Not rejection, but recognition. He had not denied her claim, had not turned them away. The healer's tent, with its dry straw and glowing hearth, was proof of that. But proof was not promise. and Sarah knew the truth she carried might cost more than she could bear. She rose, feeding the fire another log, and stared into the flames. The past was a weight she could not shed, but it was also a map. Each memory of Nathan a marker leading her here, to this moment, to this boy who deserved a father. Outside, the river sang softly, its current a steady pulse against the night. Sarah stepped to the tent's flap, peering into the dark. The village was still, its lodges mere shadows against the pine ridge. Somewhere out there, Nathan lay awake, his heart caught between duty and a truth he could not unsee. Sarah's fingers tightened on the flap, her breath clouding in the cold. "I will not let them break us," she said to the night, her voice a vow. But as she turned back to Isaac, the fire's light caught the doubt in her eyes, and she wondered if courage alone would be enough to hold them together. The morning sun broke through the Montana pines, casting dappled light across the Cheyenne village, but its warmth did not reach the healer's tent where Sarah stood. She adjusted Isaac's woolen coat, her fingers brushing his dark curls as he clung to her skirts, his amber eyes wide and watchful. The river's murmur was a faint comfort, but the village beyond buzzed with life, women hauling water, children darting between lodges, their laughter sharp against the quiet tension that followed Sarah like a shadow. She had ventured to the well at dawn, Isaac's hand in hers, and felt the weight of every stare, every hushed word. "She weaves lies," one woman had whispered, her basket of roots clutched tightly. "A foreign tongue, a child she cannot prove," another added, her voice a blade. Sarah had filled her pail and walked away, but the words clung to her, heavy as the mud on her boots. Now, as she prepared to fetch more water, a figure appeared at the tent's edge. Wendy stood there, flanked by two women, their faces stern beneath woven shawls. Wendy's elk-hide cloak was pristine, her black hair braided tightly, but her eyes burned with a fire that needed no words. She stepped forward, her voice low and deliberate, first in Cheyenne, then in English for clarity's sting. "You should not be here," she said. "You bring shame, tearing at a man's life with stories that do not hold." Sarah straightened, Isaac behind her, his small hands gripping her dress. "I came to tell the truth," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "Nothing more?" Wendy's lips curled, not a smile but a challenge. "You came to destroy a future that was never yours. You had your time. It is over." She stepped closer, her presence a wall, her words a hiss. "Go back to where you belong. This is not your land, not your tribe." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she held her silence, her eyes locked on Wendy's. She saw the woman's pride, the fear beneath it, fear of losing Nathan, of losing the place she had carved beside him. Sarah understood that fear, but she would not bend. Not here, not in front of her son. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them, her voice low. "I belong where my son does, and he belongs with his father." Wendy's eyes flashed, but before she could speak, one of her companions tugged her arm, murmuring something in Cheyenne. Wendy turned sharply, her cloak swirling, and strode away, the women following like shadows. Sarah exhaled, her hands trembling as she knelt to Isaac. "Stay close," she whispered, kissing his forehead. His eyes searched hers, too young to understand but old enough to feel the weight of the moment. Nathan crouched by the fire pit outside his lodge, the embers still warm from the night before. The village stirred around him, men sharpening tools, women weaving baskets, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the healer's tent by the river. He had not slept, his thoughts tangled in Sarah's voice, in the boy's face that mirrored his own. As he fed kindling to the fire, a young boy approached, no older than 10, his hands hidden behind his back. "For the child," the boy mumbled, thrusting forward a small woven bracelet of colored thread and sinew. Before Nathan could speak, the boy darted away, vanishing between the lodges. Nathan turned the bracelet over in his hands, its craftsmanship simple but deliberate. He knew the hands that had made it, his own, years ago, when he had carved toys for camp children, when his heart had been lighter. Someone had left it for Isaac, a silent offering, but it stirred no peace in him. It was a reminder of what he could not escape. A son he had not known, a woman he had not forgotten, and a promise to Wendy that now felt like a chain. Wendy had slept in his lodge last night, her presence a claim, her words sharp with expectation. "You will marry me," she had said months ago, her father's approval sealing the words. Nathan had not agreed, not refused. His silence had been enough in the old ways. But now everything had shifted. He rose, tucking the bracelet into his coat, and walked toward the river. The healer's tent came into view, its hide flap still, the faint smoke of a hearth curling skyward. He stopped at a distance, hidden by pines, his breath clouding in the morning chill. Sarah emerged, a pail in one hand, Isaac trailing behind her. She moved with purpose, but her shoulders carried a weight he recognized, resilience masking fear. He wanted to step forward, to speak, but the bracelet in his pocket burned like a question he could not answer. Duty pulled him back, duty to Wendy, to the tribe, to the man he had become. Yet love, buried but not dead, pulled harder. By afternoon, Sarah knelt by the riverbank, washing Isaac's coat in the cold current. The village had quieted, but the stares had not stopped. Isaac sat nearby, stacking pebbles, his small face tight with concentration. He had been silent since the well, where a girl had pulled her brother away, whispering, "Not for him." Sarah's heart ached, but she kept her voice light. "Look at that tower," she said, nodding at his pebbles. "You will be an architect one day." Isaac's eyes flickered, but his smile was brief. "They said I was bad," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the river. "They said I do not belong." Sarah's hands stilled in the water, the cold biting her skin. She moved to him, pulling him into her arms, his small body trembling against her. "You belong with me," she said, her voice fierce. "And I will never let anyone say otherwise." She held him until his breathing steadied, but the words echoed in her mind, each one a wound. She had known the village would resist, but she had not expected it to strike at her son. Isaac was her truth, her reason, and she would shield him, even if it meant standing alone. As she rose, wiping her hands on her skirt, she noticed something by the tent. A handful of wild berries, still cool with dew, placed carefully on a flat stone. She froze, her eyes scanning the trees, but no one was there. It was not the first gift. Last night, a carved wooden rabbit had appeared, its edges smooth, made for a child's grip. She knew Nathan's hand in it, the same care he had shown in the camp, carving birds and toys in the dark. He had not come close, had not spoken, but these gifts were his voice, reaching across the distance he could not cross. Sarah picked up the berries, her fingers trembling, and pressed them to her lips, tasting the faint sweetness of hope and the bitter ache of what might never be. The Montana sun hung low, painting the pine ridges with a golden haze, but the air in the Cheyenne village carried a chill that had little to do with the season. Sarah stood outside the healer's tent, her hands wringing a damp cloth as Isaac played nearby, rolling a wooden rabbit across the dirt. The village hummed with routine, women grinding corn, men repairing nets by the river, but the whispers followed her still, sharper now, like thorns catching at her skin. Each glance from a passerby, each hushed word, reminded her she was an outsider, her son a question no one wanted answered. Yet the gifts kept coming. Berries, a bracelet, a woven mat left at dawn. Nathan's silent offerings, each one a tether to a past she could not release, and a future she dared not hope for. As dusk settled, a shadow fell across the tent's entrance. Sarah looked up, her breath catching as Nathan stepped into view, his broad frame outlined by the fading light. His coat was dusted with pine needles, his eyes heavy with a weight she recognized, duty warring with desire. Isaac glanced up, clutching the rabbit, then returned to his play, sensing the tension without understanding it. "I needed to see you," Nathan said, his voice low, the words carrying a strain that made Sarah's chest tighten. "To see him." Sarah set the cloth aside, rising to meet his gaze. "You have seen us," she said, her tone even, but edged with caution. "You have left gifts." "But gifts are not answers, Nathan." Her eyes searched his, looking for the man who had fought for her in the camp, who had whispered her name in the dark. "What do you want from this?" Nathan's jaw tightened, his fingers flexing at his sides. "I want to know him," he said, glancing at Isaac. "But I do not know how. Not here. Not with—" He trailed off, but Sarah knew the name he did not speak. Wendy, the woman whose claim on him was woven into the village's expectations. "I never meant to leave you," he added, softer now, his voice raw. "Not then? Not ever?" Sarah's throat burned, memories of that Texas camp flooding back, the blood on his shirt, the warmth of his hand, the chaos that tore them apart. "I believed you were dead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I carried that grief, and then I carried him. Alone." She stepped closer, her eyes fierce. "I am not here to beg for your heart, Nathan. I am here for Isaac so he knows who he is." "But you must choose what that means." Nathan looked at Isaac, the boy's small hands turning the rabbit over, and something in his expression cracked. Guilt, longing, a father's instinct he could not name. Before he could speak, Isaac looked up, his amber eyes meeting Nathan's, and the moment held them, a silent bridge across years of absence. Nathan knelt, his voice gentle. "That rabbit," he said. "Did you name it?" Isaac hesitated, then nodded. "Bouncer," he murmured, holding it out. Nathan's lips twitched, almost a smile, but the weight returned as he stood. "I will come again," he said to Sarah, his voice a promise and a plea. He turned, vanishing into the pines, leaving Sarah with the echo of his words and the ache of what remained unsaid. The next morning, Sarah walked Isaac to the trading post, her hand firm around his. The village bustled, but the air grew still as they approached. A group of children played near the post, tossing a leather ball, their laughter bright until Isaac stepped closer. A boy, older and broader, snatched the ball away, his eyes narrowing. "Not for half-breeds," he spat, the words slicing through the morning. Isaac froze, his fingers tightening on Sarah's hand, his face crumpling with hurt. Sarah's blood surged, but before she could speak, another child, a girl with braided hair, pushed forward, shoving Isaac's shoulder. "You do not belong," she said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes. Sarah pulled Isaac back, her voice sharp. "Enough," she said, her glare silencing the children. She knelt, wiping the dust from Isaac's cheek, her hands trembling with rage and grief. "You are more than their words," she whispered, but Isaac's eyes were distant, his small body rigid with shame. As they turned to leave, Sarah felt the village's gaze, mothers watching from doorways, men pausing their work. The whispers grew bolder now, no longer hushed. "She brings trouble," one woman said. "The child is a curse," another muttered. Sarah held Isaac close, her resolve fraying but unbroken. She had faced worse, townsfolk who spat at her, churches that turned her away. But this was different. This was her son, and each slight against him was a wound she could not heal. She led him back to the tent, her steps heavy, and wondered how long she could shield him from a world that refused to see his worth. That evening, Nathan sat by the fire pit outside his lodge, the flames casting shadows across his face. Wendy approached, her steps deliberate, her elk-hide cloak catching the firelight. She had been distant since Sarah's arrival, her silences sharp with accusation, but tonight she spoke, her voice low and cutting. "You go to her," she said, not a question. "You stand by her tent, you leave gifts for her child? Do you think I do not see?" Nathan met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "I do not hide it," he said. "The boy is mine, Wendy." "I cannot unmake that truth." Wendy's hands clenched at her sides, her voice rising. "And what of me? Of us?" "My father has spoken. The village expects it. You would shame me for a woman who does not belong?" Her eyes burned, but beneath the anger was something raw. Fear. Not just of losing him, but of losing the place she had fought to hold. Nathan stood, the fire's heat warming his skin, but not his heart. "I have not chosen," he said, his voice steady but strained. "But I will not deny my son. Not for you, not for anyone." He stepped closer, his tone softening but firm. "You want a man who bends to expectation, Wendy. I am not that man." Wendy's breath caught, her face a mask of pride and pain. She turned, her cloak swirling, and strode into the night, leaving Nathan alone with the fire and the weight of his words. He reached into his coat, pulling out the wedding necklace, turquoise beads and a bear claw, a symbol of a promise he had never fully given. He turned it over in his hands, its weight heavier than bone, and stared into the flames. The village slept, but Nathan's heart did not. He was caught between two truths, a son he could not turn from, and a life he could no longer fully claim. The Montana sun dipped behind the pine ridge, casting long shadows across the Cheyenne village, where the air thrummed with the rhythm of daily life, children shouting, hides being scraped, fires crackling. Sarah knelt by the riverbank, scrubbing a pot, her hands red from the cold water. Isaac sat nearby, stacking pebbles into a wobbly tower, his wooden rabbit tucked beside him. The village had grown quieter toward her in recent days, the whispers softer, but no less sharp, and Sarah felt the weight of each one. She glanced at Isaac, his small face tight with focus, and her heart ached for the innocence he was losing to the village's scorn. A sudden cry shattered her thoughts. Isaac's voice, raw and frightened, cutting through the evening like a blade. Sarah dropped the pot, water splashing her skirts, and ran toward the sound, her pulse thundering. Rounding the smokehouse, she froze. A circle of boys, older and taller, surrounded Isaac, who lay curled on the ground, arms shielding his face. Dust clung to his clothes, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. One boy, broad-shouldered and sneering, hefted a stone, hurling it at Isaac's back. Another kicked dirt, spitting words that burned Sarah's ears. "Half-blood," he jeered. "You are not Cheyenne." "You are nothing." Isaac whimpered, his small hands clawing the earth, and Sarah's voice tore from her throat. "Stop!" Before she could reach him, a figure surged through the circle like a storm. Nathan, his face a mask of fury, knocked two boys aside with the flat of his arms. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his body around Isaac, shielding him from stones and fists. A rock struck his shoulder, then another his back, but he did not flinch, his arms a fortress around the trembling boy. The attackers froze, their eyes wide, breath heaving, as Nathan's presence filled the space, unyielding and fierce. He stood slowly, Isaac cradled in one arm, the boy's small fingers gripping his neck, his face pressed against Nathan's chest. Blood streaked Isaac's cheek, but his amber eyes met Nathan's, wide with trust. Sarah stood rooted, her breath ragged, tears burning her eyes. The village had gathered, women pausing their work, men stepping from lodges, elders watching from the fire circle. Wendy stood by the well, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. Nathan turned, his gaze sweeping the crowd, then settling on Isaac. He raised his voice, first in Cheyenne, then in English, each word deliberate and unshakable. "This child is mine," he said. "My blood, my flesh. I do not deny him. I do not hide from what I have made." He looked down at Isaac, whose eyes mirrored his own, and his voice softened. "He has my eyes, my heart." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others turned away, but none spoke. Sarah stepped forward, her voice catching. "You did not have to," she said, her words meant for Nathan alone. "I did," he replied, his eyes locked on hers, then on Isaac. "They would not have stopped unless someone stood." He shifted Isaac in his arms, the boy's small hand clutching his coat, and Sarah saw the father he had chosen to be, the man she had always known was there. The silence broke with a sharp gasp. Wendy stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage and betrayal. "You would shame me," she said, her eyes fixed on Nathan. "Before all?" The crowd stilled, the air thick with expectation. Wendy's pride was afire, her place as Nathan's promised bride a truth the village had accepted. Now it crumbled under the weight of his words. Nathan turned to her, his expression steady but not cruel. "You shamed yourself," he said, "when you let hate speak louder than truth." His voice carried no malice, only clarity, and Wendy flinched as if struck. She stood frozen, her hands clenched, then turned sharply, her elk-hide cloak swirling as she pushed through the crowd. No one followed her, but every eye felt the wound of her departure. Sarah watched, her heart a tangle of relief and sorrow. She had not come to break a woman's life, yet the truth had done so. Nathan set Isaac down gently, wiping the blood from his cheek with a tenderness that made Sarah's chest ache. "You are safe now," he murmured, and Isaac nodded, his small hand still gripping Nathan's sleeve. Sarah knelt beside them, her fingers brushing Isaac's hair, her eyes meeting Nathan's. No words passed, but the moment held them, a family, fragile but real, standing in the open for all to see. That night, Nathan returned to his lodge. The fire burned low, its embers casting faint light across the hide walls. He sat on his mat, the weight of the day pressing against his chest. The village was quiet, but the silence was not peace. It was the stillness before a reckoning. He reached into his coat, expecting to find the wedding necklace, its turquoise beads and bear claw, a symbol of a future he had never fully chosen. Instead, he found a bundle wrapped in deerskin, tied with red sinew, left just outside his door. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside lay the necklace, its beads glinting in the firelight, returned with a finality that needed no words. Wendy was gone. No farewell, no confrontation, only this, her pride laid bare in the act of letting go. Nathan turned the necklace over, its weight no longer a promise, but a memory. He set it beside the fire, his eyes tracing the bear claw, and felt the shift in his heart. He had chosen Isaac, chosen Sarah, chosen a truth that could not live in shadows. The village would not forget, nor would it fully forgive, not yet. But Nathan stood, his shoulders squared, and stepped outside. The stars burned bright above the pines, and somewhere by the river, a woman and her son slept, no longer alone. The Montana dawn broke soft over the Cheyenne village, its light filtering through pine boughs to touch the river's edge, where Sarah stood, her hands clasped around a tin mug of tea. The healer's tent behind her was empty now, its straw pallet bare, her few belongings packed into a sack. Isaac sat nearby, kicking at the dirt, his wooden rabbit tucked into his coat. Nathan's stand yesterday had changed everything. His voice claiming Isaac as his own still echoed in her mind, a vow that had silenced the village's sharpest tongues. Yet Sarah felt the weight of eyes still watching, some softer, others guarded, and she knew acceptance was a fragile thread, not yet woven into trust. Nathan approached, his steps steady, his face carrying a quiet resolve. "The council meets today," he said, his voice low. "I will speak for him. For you." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "And if they refuse?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "They will not," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Not after yesterday." He glanced at Isaac, who looked up, his amber eyes bright with a child's unblemished hope. Nathan knelt, brushing dirt from Isaac's sleeve. "You are strong," he murmured, and Isaac's small smile was answer enough. Sarah watched, her heart a tangle of gratitude and fear, knowing this moment was a beginning, but not yet a home. Nathan rose, his hand lingering near hers, not touching but close enough to feel. "There is a place," he said, "by the stream, beyond the ridge, a valley where the wind runs quiet. We can build there." His words were not a question, but an invitation, and Sarah's breath caught at the weight of it. A life, a family, a choice made in daylight. She nodded once, her eyes glistening, and Nathan turned toward the village, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. The council tent stood at the village's heart, its hide walls adorned with symbols of wind and fire. Nathan entered, his head bowed in reverence, not defeat. The elders sat in a circle, their faces lined with years and wisdom, men and women who had seen wars, migrations, and the slow turning of seasons. Matthew, the eldest, sat at the center, his clouded eyes sharp with insight. Nathan stood before them, his voice clear, each word measured. "I ask not for pity," he said, "but for recognition. This child, Isaac, is mine, not just by blood, but by bond. He was not born here, but he is of me, of us. He carries the stories of two peoples. That is not a stain. That is a bridge." Silence followed, heavy but not hostile. Matthew leaned forward, his voice strong despite his age. "Bring the child," he said. Nathan stepped outside where Sarah waited, Isaac clinging to her hand. She led him into the tent, her steps steady, though her heart raced. Isaac's eyes were wide, his small frame brave despite the weight of the moment. Matthew knelt before him, his weathered hand gentle. "What name do they call you, little one?" he asked. Isaac glanced at Sarah, who knelt beside him, her voice soft. "Tell him, Isaac." "Isaac," he said, his voice small but clear. Matthew nodded, his gaze shifting to Nathan. "And what name do you give him?" Matthew asked. Nathan stepped forward, kneeling beside his son. "Tokala," he said, his voice steady. "Little wolf." "Because he came in silence but walks with strength. Because he was born between two worlds but carries the howl of both." He looked at Isaac, his eyes softening, and Sarah's breath caught, tears brimming as she saw the father he had become. Matthew placed his hand on Isaac's head, his voice resonant. "Then let it be so. From this day this child is Tokala, son of Nathan, child of two fires." A murmur rippled through the circle, not of dissent, but of acknowledgement. No elder objected, and Sarah felt the air shift, as if the village itself exhaled. Nathan lifted Tokala into his arms, holding him high, the morning light catching the boy's face, no longer a secret, but a name, a place, a future. Weeks later, the valley beyond the ridge hummed with life. Sarah and Nathan had built a cabin by the stream, its timber walls rough but sturdy, each beam carved by Nathan's hands. Sarah planted herbs by the window, sage and thyme, their scent mingling with the pine air. Tokala chased birds through the grass, his laughter ringing like a bell, his bare feet splashing in the shallows. The cabin was small, its hearth modest, but it was warm, a home forged from choice, not obligation. Sarah stood on the step, watching Tokala skip stones, his wooden rabbit now joined by a carved wolf Nathan had made. Nathan emerged from the trees, a bundle of firewood in his arms, his eyes finding hers with a quiet ease that felt like peace. The village had not forgotten, but it had softened. One morning, a woman left a bundle of dried berries at their door, her nod brief but kind. An elder brought cloth dyed with red root, his silence a gesture of respect. A child arrived, shy with salve for bruises, whispering, "My mother made this." Sarah wept quietly that day, her fingers tracing the cloth, and Nathan held her hand, saying nothing, his presence enough. The gifts were small, but they were steps, threads weaving them into the village's fabric. Sarah looked at Nathan now, his shoulders broad against the sunset, and felt the weight of their journey lift, if only for a moment. One evening, as Sarah tucked Tokala into a pallet by the hearth, she found a woven mat beneath his pillow, its edges frayed but carefully made. She turned it over, her fingers pausing at the pattern, simple, deliberate, like the bracelet left days ago. Nathan stood in the doorway watching, and Sarah met his gaze. "They are trying," she said, her voice soft. "They see him now." "They see us," Nathan corrected, stepping closer. He touched Tokala's hair, then Sarah's cheek, his hand lingering. "We are here," he said, "and we are staying." Sarah leaned into his touch, the fire's glow warming the space between them, and for the first time in years she felt not just hope, but certainty. A family, not in shadows, but in light. The Montana Valley glowed under an autumn sun, its birch trees and red sandstone cliffs framing a sky so clear it seemed to hum with memory. Years had passed since Sarah, Nathan, and Tokala had built their cabin by the stream, its timber walls now weathered but steadfast, a testament to their choice. A young maple tree stood behind the cabin, its flame-colored leaves rustling in the breeze, a canopy for the children who sat cross-legged beneath it, their eyes wide with wonder. Tokala, no longer a boy but a young man with strong shoulders and dark hair tied back, stood before them, his voice steady yet gentle, carrying the weight of two worlds. "My father was a warrior," he said, "not because he fought with blades, but because he chose peace when it was easier to turn away. My mother was not of this tribe, but she walked into it carrying truth like a torch." A small girl raised her hand, her braids swaying. "Were you scared?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Tokala smiled, his amber eyes catching the light. "I was," he said, "but they never were." He knelt, meeting her gaze, and continued, his words painting the stormy night his mother had knocked on a door with a secret in her arms, the day his father stood before stones and shouted his name. The children leaned closer, their breaths soft, caught in the rhythm of a story that was no longer rumor, but legacy. Sarah watched from the cabin's doorway, her hands clasped, her eyes soft with memory. She wore a woven shawl, its threads dyed with indigo, a gift from a village woman years ago. The years had streaked her auburn hair with silver, but her face held the same quiet strength that had carried her through rain and rejection. Nathan stepped beside her, his presence as familiar as the stream's song. His hair was gray at the temples, but his eyes burned with the fire she had first seen in a Texas camp, behind wire and smoke. He took her hand, his fingers warm and sure, and they stood together, watching Tokala weave their past into the village's future. "He tells it better than we could," Nathan said, his voice low, a trace of pride softening its edges. Sarah's lips curved, her gaze on their son. "He tells it as he lived it," she said. "That is enough." They turned, walking past the garden where sage and thyme still bloomed, past the stream where Tokala once chased birds. The forest trail wound through birch and pine, its air rich with earth and sky. Their steps were slow, unhurried, their hands clasped as they moved beneath the trees, their shadows stretching long across the path. The cabin had grown over the years. A new room for Tokala, a wider hearth, a windmill carved from wood and bone, its slow spin whispering through the valley. The village had come, little by little, not with fanfare, but with gestures that spoke louder than words. Women brought berries, elders offered cloth, children shared salve and stories. Each gift had built a bridge, and Sarah had wept only once, the first time, her fingers tracing a bundle of red root dye as Nathan held her hand. Now the valley was their home, not just a place, but a promise kept. Tokala ran the stream's edge, no longer a child but a son of two fires, his laughter replaced by a quiet strength that drew others to him. One morning Tokala found a small pouch by the maple tree, tied with sinew, its leather worn but carefully stitched. He brought it to Sarah, who turned it over in her hands, her breath catching at the 3 glass beads inside, green, yellow, sky blue, and a tiny carved feather. She looked at Nathan, standing by the hearth, and her voice was soft. "It is from her," she said. "Wendy." Nathan nodded, his eyes distant but not cold. "She speaks through what is left behind," he said. Sarah traced the feather, its edges smooth, and felt a weight lift. Wendy had vanished years ago, her pride a fire that had burned out in silence, but this was something else, forgiveness or letting go, offered without words. Sarah smiled faintly, tucking the pouch into her shawl. "Maybe it is both," she said, and Nathan's hand found hers, a silent agreement that some wounds healed in time. They sat on the cabin step as the sun dipped low, its gold brushing the peaks above. Tokala ran by the stream, skipping stones, his silhouette tall against the water's shimmer. Sarah leaned into Nathan's shoulder, her voice a hush. "He is strong," she said, watching their son. Nathan shook his head, his arm wrapping around her. "He is ours." Her question came then, gentle but sharp in the quiet. "Do you regret it?" "Giving up the path, the place you held?" He looked toward the village, its fires faint in the distance, the names he had once answered to now carried by others. "No," he said, his voice steady. He pulled her close, his arm encircling her and Tokala, who ran back, soaked and laughing. "Love should not live in shadows," he said. "It deserves daylight." Sarah rested her head against his chest, her eyes closing as the wind whispered through the valley, the maple swaying with the breath of a new season. The forest trail stretched before them, its pines tall and silent, bearing witness to their steps. Sarah's voice came like a thought etched in the wind, not spoken, but remembered. "If anyone asks why I knocked on his door in the rain," she thought, the memory flickering behind her eyes, "it is because I knew some loves do not come to ask permission. They come to live." The stream sang softly, the windmill turned, and the mountain sky held them, as it always had. A love not written in books, but carried in footsteps, laughter, and the hearts of those brave enough to choose it. They walked on, hand in hand, their shadows one, and the valley hummed with the quiet certainty of a life built on truth. She waited in the storm, then handed him a baby, and said, "You left us."